All right, welcome back to another installment of the Wide Right podcast. Busy day here. We just had Bruce Feldman on talking about Miami's latest hire at defensive coordinator in Lance Guidry. And I wanted to bring on somebody who obviously got to know Guidry a little bit when he was at Marshall for the past 2 seasons, putting together one of the best defenses in college football. And our guest is Luke Creasy, who works for the Herald-Dispatch in Huntington, West Virginia. He's a 2022 West Virginia National or NSMA Sports Writer of the Year. I don't call him National Sports Writer of the Year. I'm giving you too much credit, brother, but
I know.
still, State Writer of the Year is pretty cool.
Yeah. I appreciate it, man. Glad to be on.
Well, first of all, what can you just let's talk as people first, because I see the stats. I can rattle off a bunch of stats, but just what is Lance like as a person? What's he like to cover? I mean, is he forthcoming with information? Is he secretive? Is he one of those coaches always worried about somebody's reading my clippings, they're going to take something and use it against me in the game plan? What's he like?
Yeah, just a really fun guy to be around. And if you get him talking about anything Louisiana, you're going to be there for a while. So, he takes pride in where he comes from and takes pride in his football abilities. So, the access we got to him at Marshall was kind of limited as far as in season goes. That's just the way Charles Huff runs things. I think it might be an Alabama thing, but. But the interactions that we did have with him were always fun. He is a great football mind. Has a really fun defensive system for his players, and is known for being a recruiter as well. And I don't think you can recruit very well if you're not a very well likable guy in the first place. And so I think that speaks a lot to it. Really, really high quality character. That's coming to Miami, and they certainly loved him here in Huntington, and a little bit of a surprise to see him move on from Tulane as quickly as he did. I think it's a good step for him.
Well, certainly money had to have played a role, right? I mean, Miami's one of these Power Five schools that has a little bit more money to spend maybe than Tulane, who's a private school just like they are, but not nearly the resources I think that Miami has, and I would suspect that probably played a role. And the fact that he gets to go to a Power Five level, the impression I got, and Bruce Feldman was on, like I mentioned with me earlier. Here's a guy who probably would have been at the Power Five level if he didn't have a little bit of history with some things that happened to him back in the day. I think Miami giving him that opportunity is a huge step up to get a chance to really, I think, help his career in the long run. He's only 51 years old. He's a guy who could still be a head coach in a year or two. Do you see that in him? Do you think he's a head coach potential?
Yeah, I certainly think the potential is there. And I mean, he has the head coaching experience. I was a
Mm-hmm.
head coach at McNeese State there for a couple of years, and and then just the way college football works. To climb that ladder, it's a hard jump I think, in my opinion, to be a head coach at one of the lower levels of college football and then make the jump to a head coach at the Division I level. Some people have done it and had success with it, but I think by and large, you got to climb that ladder again. So he sees an opportunity at Marshall to become the defensive coordinator, installs the system, comes in with Charles Huff when he was hired as a former assistant from Alabama, and really made it his own, and had the right players. Had a few transfers that came in and bolstered that defense last year. A couple of them had played for him before at McNeese State, most notably Andre Sam,
Mm-hmm.
who transferred from Marshall to Tulane after Guidry left Marshall for the same school. So that's something maybe to keep an eye on for Miami to see if any of his former McNeese connections make that jump as well. But certainly a talented guy, and has what it takes to succeed at a high level.
Yeah, we can start going over some of these stats. Some of them were really impressive. Number three in the country in yards per play is kind of grabs your attention right away. We have Max Olson does this great statistics during the season. Stop rate in college football, how often you stop a team, get off the field. Even in 3 plays or less, that kind of thing. Number two in stop rate. How would you judge the talent Marshall had? Because obviously people are going to say, well, he put up those numbers against a group of 5 schools, right? Like they did beat
Yeah.
Notre Dame. They did go on the road and win at Notre
Yeah.
Dame. But how would you judge the overall talent maybe at Marshall? I mean, did he have NFL guys? I mean, was this more of a product of the talent that he had compared to the teams he was facing, or was this more of, hey, combination of great coaching and some pretty good players?
I think you could say there's probably some NFL talent on that side of the ball. Now that's not day one, day two talent. That might be way down in a day three pick, or I think of a guy like Najee Johnson, who was a seventh round pick by the Chiefs last year, who played in that system and did well. It's kind of a system where everybody eats. I'll use that phrase. But it starts, I think, with the pressure up front, and he had some dudes up front for Marshall last year. A couple of them, again, had transferred in from Power Five schools. I think of like an Anthony Watts who came from Purdue. Isaiah Gibson had started his college career at Kentucky. Comes in and really performs well. He puts guys in position where they're going to succeed, and I think that's when you start to see the true talent of a defensive coordinator is when he can come in and with guys that maybe he didn't recruit but get the most out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Lance did that in Huntington, and it certainly has the potential to do that elsewhere. And when you look at just the structure of college football, Miami's probably got a lot more pull in the recruiting realm of things than Marshall did. The reality of being in a group of 5 school is if you have success, whether that success transferred in or is NFL talent or is just talented, if you have success, you're going to move up. And I think that's true for players and coaches alike. So I think that's just the natural progression of things for Lance, and it's taken him to Miami. And I think it sets up well for him again.
Patrick Powers wrote an article for Sports Info Solutions back in the beginning of November. I'm sure you're probably familiar with it. These kind of deep dives to statistical analysis in terms of just what he calls, right? Like what would you say, Lance calls as far as a defense? And I'm going to throw some numbers out. I mean, really, the whole point of it is their number one goal is to stop the pass. A lot of defensive coordinators like, well, it all starts with stopping the run, but I guess his philosophy is no. In today's game, the way teams throw the football, you really got to be good at that first. And I know he's a defensive back, comes from that school of thought. He coached defensive backs for a long time. I'm going to just throw this one out there. So Marshall runs cover 1, cover 3, and cover 4. 20% of the time, it has the 9th highest variance in terms of coverages called in college football. I mean, really, you'll see 5 defensive backs out there. I think 70% of the time. Sometimes it'll be a linebacker. How would you describe what you watched from a simple X's and O's perspective in terms of what he does with coverage, and is there anything special or unique that makes him really good at it?
I think it just starts with, he does want to defend that pass, and that's an important part to this defense. But and he does that by bringing pressure up front.
Mm-hmm.
He uses the athleticism of the defensive line to kind of complement what's happening on the back end. Because if you think about it, if you can pressure the quarterback, you're going to force the throw faster, and you're going to keep that quarterback contained to the pocket. And even if he does get outside the pocket, he's got to make a decision. And a lot of times quarterbacks aren't going to throw better on the run than they are standing in the pocket. So I think it all starts with that pressure up front, but it relies on the athleticism of the defensive lineman. And I think when you look at the tape, a guy like Owen Porter stands out for Marshall, who was a little bit undersized when he came into college. He was a fifth-year senior last year. And Guidry, I think, got the most out of him versus anybody who had coached Owen before. Kind of saw him come alive late in the New Orleans Bowl at the end of the 2021 season, and then he just continued that success. I think that's probably a prime candidate for that defense is a smaller but strong athletic defensive lineman, and then on the back end you just have to have guys that can fly to the ball. And speed is a big part of it. I can't think of many times when Marshall was any slower than the offenses they were facing. But the one thing I will say that came to light at times was defending the deep ball. Sometimes receivers had a tendency, receivers had a tendency to get past that defense. When they were applying some of that pressure, and I think you can see that across football when you're so key on bringing pressure. Sometimes that the backside of that defense can be the scapegoat. And I think because of the aggressive nature of how he calls games, I think that was exploited a little bit. But
Right.
I can think of several times when they gave up a big play, but the opponent didn't score on that drive because they buckled down late. They make a big. I think Troy had a couple passes of 50+ yards when Marshall traveled down there last year, but they didn't score an offensive touchdown the entire game. And
Wow.
so it's kind of a bend but don't break. He's gonna take that risk of, okay, can we make the big play? We might give up a big play, but we're gonna buckle down after that and keep things manageable. So I think it's a very aggressive style of defense, and it's fun to watch. I think probably the Marshall defense was a lot more fun to watch than the offense at times this year.
Right.
And that there's a variety of factors to that, of course, but
Right.
a lot of that had to do with the play calling.
This is another interesting stat because somebody mentioned this to me on Twitter when I was asking for mailbag questions, but they said the Herd play with only 2 down linemen 69% of the time, the third highest rate in football. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
most people think you got to have at least 3 down linemen, right? Or if not
Yeah.
four. How does that affect run defense, and how effective is maybe just playing 2 down linemen, letting guys pass rush? How does that sort of just a big maybe trademark of his defense?
Yeah, I think it starts with versatility as well.
Hmm.
You're not recruiting a defensive lineman just to play on the line. You're not recruiting a linebacker just to hang back in the middle of the defense.
Right.
Kobe Cumberlander was one of the linebackers for Marshall last year, and he was one of those that played on the D line, but didn't get down. And so that creates a kind of a whole other layer to that run defense because you don't have guys that are just gonna plow forward no matter what happens. You've got spies, for lack of a better term, who are going to hang back and plug some of those other gaps that come from run blocking schemes. And so I think that was probably the played mostly in favor of Marshall last year. Even just having 2 down linemen a lot of the time, they were aware enough to be able to make the play and smart enough to commit one way or the other when they kind of had a sense of what was coming. And of course, Marshall's philosophy is, get them in 3rd and long, and then they have to throw. So you take
Right.
away the run game.
Right.
And again, that goes back to the pressure he created. But just a very a fun system to watch, and the versatility up front is huge. And Marshall's run defense showed how that success can translate from, no matter if they're playing run or pass. A couple times, like I said, they were exploited, but they always rebounded.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said for that. Coastal Carolina. Let's go back to another example of Marshall came out, got punched in the mouth early. Coastal Carolina went up 21-0 in the first quarter and finished the game with 24 points.
Wow.
They scored touchdowns on their first 3 possessions and then only had a field goal to show for it the rest of the way. And I think it was after those first 3 drives, and maybe they gave up 70 or 80 yards of total offense once they kind of got with it. It's hard to make adjustments for the offenses who are seeing that. And I think that's why they had the success they did. You mentioned that Notre Dame win, and that was huge. Notre Dame had a lot of trouble moving the ball consistently, and it's because of the different looks they were able to create by not having to commit 3 to 4 down linemen and being able to play extra defensive backs and bring pressure in different ways from any level of the defense.
I'm stealing this from the story from Sports Info Solutions, but I guess it said the Herd had the 7th highest average of men in the box, 6.73. So really, I mean, sometimes, like you said, they put those corners on an island, right? I mean, they kind of,
Yeah.
and that's why they
Yep.
give up the big plays. But they do sort of defend the run, but at the same time, the focus is the pass. So it's a very unique defense, I think, in that
Yeah.
sense. A lot of 2 down linemen. It's something that maybe Miami fans if they want to go back and watch the film, who was somebody who really hurt them? Is there a team? I mean, obviously they lost 4 games, but I'm curious, is there somebody who had a lot of success against them and why?
It's a good question. I think, and this is going to sound crazy, Bowling Green.
Okay.
It was. I think there was a little bit of a Notre Dame hangover going into that one, but Notre Dame found a way. They put up 31 points. I think it was 34-31 was the final. 31 points in regulation. And then I might be getting it wrong. Don't quote me. It's been a while since I looked at that box score. I think they found a way to dink and dunk around the pressure. And
Okay.
And two of the biggest plays in that game, as far as defense or as far as offensively goes, came in the late stages. Marshall's trying to bring that aggressive approach and bring a blitz on fourth down, maybe, and then they got burned over the top. And so I think because of what Bowling Green did early on, which was, they established the run, one. Two, they were able to hit some passes and work their way back into a game after going down by 2 touchdowns early. I think that slow and steady approach is something that not a lot of people did after that. Because you mentioned they lost 4 games, but I can't think of a time when they were ever out of a game.
Right.
I thought Coastal Carolina was going to get there, and then it never did. Even though the Chanticleers came out and scored 3 touchdowns right off the bat, but and they were in that Bowling Green game the whole way. But to that point, now granted that was only the 3rd game of the year, but I think that was the first time anybody had moved the ball well and consistently against the Herd, and Marshall didn't have answers for it at that point. And so I don't know if Bowling Green's the model you want to go off, but certainly worked, what the Falcons were doing there. But Troy was able to exploit them downfield with some of their speed guys on the receivers, but weren't able to score touchdowns. And so Louisiana did a good job. They didn't have a run game, and it was all pass. But they were still able to find a way to exploit the back end. And I think the more you can exploit that back end, the better off an offense is going to be against a Guidry defense. But the thing is, it doesn't happen that often.
Right. There's not many teams that have those elite speed receivers that are,
yeah.
I mean, and I guess so really, I mean, you got to have good cornerbacks. And that seems like the one position going into the season for Miami that you say, man, they got to replace 2 starters. They lost Tyreek Stevenson. They lost DJ Ivey. Not that those guys didn't give up big plays last year, but
yeah,
you need some young guys, some newcomers to come along and help. They did go out and pick up a transfer from UCF and Devontae Brown. So from Miami's perspective, that's kind of the area where they'll be challenged. I was looking at the stats now that in front of me for Marshall. Only one game where they gave up more than 400 yards of offense. That was a loss to Troy. And they had several other games where they gave up fewer than 300. I mean, Appalachian State sticks out like a sore thumb, especially for me covering the ACC, seeing that shootout between App State and North Carolina where there was seemingly no defense played, and they held them to 293 yards of total offense. Old Dominion 209. Old Dominion beat Virginia Tech, won that game 12-0. So seems to me like when these guys are on, they can really dominate some opponents. I mean, the way that he calls games.
Yeah, they can. And I think their defense was a reason they won 9 games this year. I think without as dominant a performance as they had really from week 1 to the bowl game, Marshall might win 7 games. I think they were definitely the deciding factor in in a lot of those ball games, and it's certainly fun to watch. And I think Marshall's going to miss Guidry a lot. Still haven't named his replacement. I guess that announcement could be coming soon, but definitely going to miss him. Here in Huntington is the Herd, but again, Miami got a good one.
Luke, I appreciate you coming on, man. Best of luck to you in the season coming up and all your coverage over there for the paper.
All right. Appreciate it, man.
Take care, man.
You too.